Hey everybody, and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know. This is a podcast about old stuff, old books, philosophy, kind of anything further than 100 years back that we kind of want to talk about. Yeah, that's
a good description.
Right?
Yeah, I like that.
My name is AJ Hannenberg, and I'm joined by Thomas Magby.
Hello.
And Graham Donaldson.
Hello.
And today we are talking about the same. I mean, it's the same thing I talked about last time.
Yeah,
why are we doing this again?
I just figured, we'd Grahamify it.
Or just do it better.
Do it the right way. Yeah,
You were talking about Aristotle's De Anima. So you're talking about Aristotle talking about like trying to figure out what the soul is. Plato's tripartite soul he's kind of like got a different axe to grind with that question.
Does De Anima sound like a kind of yogurt to you?
De Anima?
Buy some De Anima yogurt.
Right?
Yeah.
De Anima yogurt.
But it's delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it keeps things moving around on motion.
It's pretty good.
Helps with movement, if you know what I'm saying. We've kind of been joking that we should be redoing some of our earlier, crappier episodes.
It's not a joke, right? Like, wait.
I was taking it humorously.
Well, you're about to do one, right? Isn't that what's happening?
I am. Yeah. So we're going back and we're going to look at the tripartite soul, this Platonic idea, but I kind of want to use it to also talk about another thing. It's not so much that it's a Platonic idea, but it's very much in the classical model of knowing, and it has to do with the rational faculties, because I think that we as modern people, when we talk about reason, we mean something quite more narrow than it was meant by reason in the ancient world. And so just kind of want to clear that up a little bit. So Plato had this concept that the soul, whatever it is, and AJ's episode last week was Aristotle, Plato's student, looking into maybe trying to figure out what the soul actually is. Plato's less concerned about what the soul actually is, and he's more talking about a theory that he has about how the soul functions, or how a human person functions with a soul. Like that the soul kind of has
proper functioning of the human animal.
That's right. And Plato does this less because he's concerned about the proper functioning of the human animal, and more that he's concerned with the proper functioning of human societies. So this theory of the soul comes from Plato's Republic, where Socrates is trying to investigate the nature of justice. And in order to investigate the nature of justice, they have to invent a fictional society.
Mm-hmm, totally.
And then it's like a 10-book odyssey. And by the end, like, children are getting married by casting lots, and we're not teaching children math and all that.
I don't see why
stuff.
people didn't like Socrates.
Yeah. Socrates is great.
With a simple question, they had to invent an entire society.
Oh, yeah. It's like, well, really answer this. So Plato says that for the human person, our soul has these three categories, these three parts. You have the rational, you have what he calls the spirited, and then you've got the appetitive. And the human person is divided into these three parts. So the rational part is the thinking part. It's the part where logic resides. It's the part where you can think through things. It's the part where you make decisions, where you take in all of the data and you come out with a decision. Interestingly, Plato and also sort of people in the ancient world, the rational part of the soul was also where you made moral decisions. So for a person in the classical or in the ancient world, being moral and being rational were comparable things. Whereas I think at least when I poll my students about this and I say, where does morality lie? Is it, or what kind of thing of the soul, as if we're having this conversation, what kind of thing of the soul is morality? And most of the time, students will say what? What do you think, Hannah? What do they say?
Well, so one more time.
What do they say? Where do they say emotions lie? Like in the ancient world, they said morality was a rational conclusion that you could draw.
Like a feeling, right?
Yeah,
that's
that it's a feeling.
Now. Like you feel like it's the right thing to do.
I just feel like this is the right thing to do.
Yeah. Or you can get this weird like Adam Smith has this thing. It's like morality is this like empathy, essentially,
yes.
Right? Like the reason you do something is you feel bad or you feel in harmony with something, and so you act a certain way.
There's some sort of resonance with the thing in front of you, and maybe there's something to that. But in the classical world, reason was something that was morality was part of the rational faculties.
Right.
That being moral was reasonable. Anyway, that's kind of a controversial thing. We can drill into that a little bit later. The second part of the soul was the spirited. And the spirited part is that which moves you. That which, I guess a really good translation of that could be willpower. It is your will. It is the thing that you need to get, it needs to be excited in order for the person to do something. And then the last one is the appetitive, and that is the desire. And the appetitive is kind of like, it is the part of the soul that is, I sort of think about it as like, I think of the appetitive part of the soul as like a landscape where a lot of it is sort of in daylight and then it kind of just bleeds out into this like wilderness darkness beyond. Like the appetitive part of the soul is the part of the soul that if you follow too long head into it, you are moving into like bestial territory. Like you're becoming more like an animal. And if you are ruled by your appetites, that is what you, if you're a man ruled by your appetites, you are more of a beast than you are a man.
Sure.
And so, I mean, that's essentially it. So now we're not going to go into talk about how Plato then thinks society is based on this. And if you're interested, listener, in that, you can go back to AJ's wonderful series on the Republic, where he goes into this book by book and he spends a good time talking about how the city is based off of the soul.
Really, it's our best series ever.
It's probably our best series.
The best one.
Without
it's
question.
The best one, without question. Society should be run by the intellect. Or society should be run by the smarts, just like how the person should be run by your intellect.
And if you're a dum-dum, know your place. Stay at the bottom and raise some goats.
Yeah, raise some goats. Cool. Be an artisan, and that's or do a podcast. I don't know.
Criticizing all your betters.
Yeah. You hear that? No, I was kidding.
Obama? Is he like a...
Pardon me. I don't know. Okay, so a little fun experiment to really sort of think about these three parts of the soul is to think about, like, if you let any one of those parts of the soul rule the man, what kind of man you would have. Because all three of these parts need to be in a specific order. They need to have a specific relationship to one another for what Plato says, for somebody to be a healthy person.
Would you say a hierarchy?
A hierarchy.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
So there is a hierarchy in the soul, but and the hierarchy is that your reason should make decisions. It should be informed by your appetites, and then those decisions should be carried out by your willpower. That is the healthy person. Is that a fair assessment? Is that Plato as you understand it?
I'm grinning because I love the way you say hierarchy.
Oh,
Have I never brought this up?
No.
How does he say it?
You leave out a syllable
I do?
entirely.
Say it again.
Hierarchy.
It's
Oh,
hierarchy.
I'm sorry. I don't chew on the RRs in there. Hierarchy.
No, I told you it's one of my favorite
Not a
things.
dog with a
So I
bone.
don't dislike it. You say
Hierarchy.
hierarchy. It's really fast.
Hierarchy.
Hierarchy. I like it.
I'm a stranger in a strange land.
I know.
Hannibal.
It's one of those little Canadian things that came down with you, and it makes me happy.
That's funny.
Hierarchy. Anyway, so the healthy person makes the decisions with their reason. Your reason can be informed by your appetites, and then those decisions are carried out by the will. So if you were somebody who was completely run, so if you let willpower be the dominant force in your personality, well, I guess what kind of person would you be?
Well, it depends.
Yeah.
It depends which way the willpower rules you. There's a mean, right? So no will, and you're a coward, and you never get anything done. You'd call that person like a slug or a loser. Right? You got no will to do the stuff you have to do.
That's right.
You're not regulating well your appetites.
layabout.
You're a huncher. And then if you have too much will, you might be like too intense or foolhardy, right? You're not thinking things through before you do them.
You're the
just go
guy
do the
that's
things.
like, hey man, jump off the roof. He's like, yes.
Well, that might be too much. Like, no, he's like, I'm gonna do this. He goes out and builds a treehouse, even though he has no idea how to build a treehouse.
It's like you can walk into the room by opening the door or busting down the door.
And what it might mean is that you have incredible trouble regulating your appetites, right? And you don't think things through.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you can be someone who's ruled by their will, and you are, you can be too lazy or too foolhardy. You can be someone who's ruled by their appetites, and that's a pretty straightforward picture. can you be someone? So, is there a mean for being ruled by appetites? Obviously, you can be ruled by your appetites in extremity, and that would be unhealthy. But is there a way that you can be ruled by your appetites in deficiency?
Absolutely, anorexia.
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. If you have some sort of if you have some sort of strong sense that all desires are bad for you, is that it?
Yeah, well, that, or I think, there's an appropriate amount of appetite.
Yeah.
Right. Where if I have a wife, I should hunger for her. Like it's at least in, like, even in the sexual sense.
Sure.
And if I don't have that, that's probably something not functioning correctly in the marriage.
Yeah.
Right.
We could have talked about steaks or something, but
I really went for the gold with this one, I think.
yes, exactly. So so there could be an excess or deficiency. And if you're a person ruled by your appetites, I think it's apt to say that you are closer to beast than you are to man. At least that's what Plato was.
Maybe it's like you're afraid of your appetites, and so you become ascetic.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I deny every appetite I have, which is probably too far.
So there's the right relationship with one's appetites are that they are regulated by the reason. Right. They're not, if they rule you in excess, you're giving in to them. If they rule you and you think that every single piece of your appetite is somehow damaging or hurtful or trying to get you, and you're an ascetic, then that's probably being ruled by your appetites in the negative sense. But everything should be ruled by your rational faculties. And the healthy man is the person for whom, they are informed by the appetites, but they can control them with reason. Now, so that's very much, that's basically the Platonic soul right there. It's a very helpful little model to think about. But when in the ancient world, when they talked about reason and they talked about the rational faculty, it was much more expansive than the way that we talk about reason, at least maybe how I thought of reason when I was a kid growing up, or when people talked about your brain, or when people talked about being logical. So when we talk about reason as modern people, we tend to think of reason as what? How would you what would be like the?
It's like book smart, or like you read, like you know a lot of things.
It's the work of logic.
It's
you
the
are
work of
figuring
logic.
things out.
Yeah.
That's right. So you have an analytical mind, that you are an observer, you are a charter, or you are somebody that can do taxonomies. You are somebody that can put things into categories. If we're talking definition, you're going into, you're delegating genuses and species, right? That you're the realm of analysis and analytics and data gathering, and that is true of the rational faculties. Pardon me, in the rational faculties. But in the ancient world, there was other categories. There was another side of the rational that wasn't just the analytical. And the word that they would have for that was the dialectic. And so you had these two things. You had the analytical faculty in the rational faculty, and you had the dialectical faculty in the rational faculty. So let's look at analysis first. So analysis is very much what it is. If you were going to analyze something, like AJ, if you were going to analyze, let's say we brought in a frog, and I said, I want you to tell me something I want you to know this frog by analyzing it. So I want you to come to a knowledge of the frog through analysis. What would we do?
You're probably hinting at dissection.
Cut that thing up.
You would cut it up?
Yeah.
But I would probably want to get to know it.
No, you can't get to know it. Maybe that's part of analysis, but
I'm not allowed to put food near it and see what food it likes?
No.
Or
no,
pat
that's
it around?
definitely, you can, and see
I
what
don't
environment
have
it
to
wants.
cut it up to get to know this frog, do I? I can look
You don't
up
have to cut
frog
it
on
up.
Wikipedia.
You
and
can
then
look
I
him up on Wikipedia for sure.
And then get to know this frog individually by seeing what kind of foods he likes. Does he like to hop from high places, or does he not? Is he afraid of that?
Very good. Now, so basically the analysis level of knowing something is through all of the observation. So you can be observing its habitat, observing what it likes to eat. You can put into its categories what kind of frog is it in relationship to other frogs.
Does it have silly feet?
Does it have silly feet? Is it, eventually you can come up to some sort of genus, some sort of species, and then you can cut it up and see its organs.
No, I don't want to do that part.
You have to. Yeah, do analysis.
Oh.
No, you don't have to do that. But in that in the analytical relationship, the frog is the object. and you are the subject. The verb is you. You are doing the verb. You are verbing that frog. You are analyzing it. So
It's another question. Is the frog comfortable being verbed?
I don't know. You can't, because you can't talk to it, you don't know.
Yeah.
But you are. It is the object on the table being analyzed, and that is a tremendously powerful faculty, the analytical faculty. We have done much in this world through our analysis, through the gathering of data, and then if you've gathered enough data, you can probably make predictions about what frogs like it would do.
Well, you're talking about that movie Moneyball, aren't you?
Yes, exactly. You've gathered data, and
They got to get on base.
You don't need someone who can hit and throw. You just need someone that gets on base.
Yep.
And you don't need to replace all of those runs. You don't need to replace that player. You need to replace that player's runs. Right? It's a great movie. I love that movie.
It really is a good movie.
It's a good
If you haven't
movie.
seen it, audience, it's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
Premise, so that they know what we're talking about, is they use data and realize that the way to win World Series is just find players who get on base. Not players who look good, not players who like make spectacular catches and can bring in fans. You want someone that gets on base and does it. Like, they use an algorithm, and then they win.
They just use alternative metrics of analysis to find low-valued players. Players that were low value, but that could do something that they wanted to do with their new system.
It's pretty cool.
But the irony is that the Oakland Athletics never won the World Series. They got to the final, but the Yankees won with having just better players that they spent hundreds of millions of dollars on. Now, that being
So
said,
the real answer is throw money at it.
it is.
Always
But
the
the
answer.
Boston Red Sox did win the World Series and
Later.
broke the curse
Yep.
using Billy Bean's analysis methods.
Yep,
So it kind of does work. But it is kind of, we should always realize that like Real Madrid's going to win anyway. Doesn't, or the Yankees are going to win because they've got money. Anyway, so you can make predictions about what you can make predictive models about this frog based on your analysis of this individual frog, and frogs like it. You can have a bell curve of froggy behaviors based on your analysis of this frog, and you could make predictive models of, if I go to this part of the world, chances are I'm going to find this frog there because he likes this kind of habitat. That kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Analysis, tremendously powerful. The other part of the rational faculty that we have is dialectic. And dialectic is where the relationship between object and subject break down a little bit. And it is a different way of knowing. So in our English language, when we talk about the word knowing, we don't really have a word that denotes this concept. Whereas like in French, you have connaître and savoir, and I'm assuming in other Romantic languages you have sort of words about knowing that denote different kinds of knowing. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of a joke in English because you go and you read the Old King James and it says that Adam lay with his wife and he knew her, and you're like, I hope he knew her.
Wait, what?
I know you know.
Yeah, I seen you around the garden.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Eve, right? Yeah.
Rib? Am I saying it right? Rib?
But obviously, what the Bible is saying there is that there is Adam has a knowledge of Eve experientially, and it's a euphemism. We don't really have the word of this sort of deeper experiential knowledge, or a knowledge that comes through living with, or a knowledge that comes through a relationship, and that's what dialectic is. And that's even, Hamburg, what you were jokingly getting at. You're like, I want to know this frog as an individual. I want to know like his particular froggy habits. Does this individual frog like, crickets, or does he like high places?
Is he sensitive about his short tongue?
That's true. And is that true of all frogs, or just this particular individual frog? And that way of knowing only comes through dialectic, and dialectic is the relationship through the relationship, the back and forth kind of relationship. And that's how you get to know, knowing something through living with it, knowing something through experiencing it. Analyzing something is not maybe Plato, or if you go back into the classical world, they may have put this into a hierarchy of knowledge. Whereas the analytical knowledge was maybe a more basic, and the dialectical knowledge was a bit of a higher knowledge. I think if you read enough, like definitely Socrates, when he's trying to know something, he puts more emphasis on the dialectic than he does on the analytical. And that's what he's doing. He's having dialogues back and forth with people. To do dialectic well, if you want to know something in this dialectic way, you have to you sort of have to accept it as a thing. How can I say this? Let's say you were trying to teach somebody about courage. You were trying to know what it means to be courageous, or you're trying to know courage. An analysis of courage would be, let's compile a list of all courageous acts and look for similarities and differences. That would be an analysis of courage. Or an analysis of courage would be, you talk to somebody who did something courageous and you ask them questions about their mental state at various times during that courageous act. Or even if you could hook up, like diodes or something to their brain while they were in the stressful situation, and you could maybe analyze the materiality of courage in the body while they were going through this thing and they decided to be courageous, and you could sort of like measure the things that were happening in them, right? This is sort of the analytical side of things. It's pretty, a lot of that's kind of interesting. That is helpful stuff. The other way of knowing about courage is trying to be courageous.
Doing something scary.
Is doing something scary,
Yeah.
and putting yourself into that situation and doing that thing, is knowing it sort of from the inside. This is true if you were trying to understand, it's like the studying of the culture by like watching movies about them, or reading the books they do, or studying their language. And then going and living in that country and being in that culture for a long time. That is, it's where you are no longer the external object merely observing, but that you are in relationship with the thing that you are trying to know. And this is a way of knowing something that is, I don't know if you want to say it's deeper, but it's a different way of knowing. David Hicks, in his Norms and Nobility book, where he's talking about education, he thinks that this dialectical way of knowing is very important in education. Let me just sort of read. I want to read a rather lengthy paragraph where he's talking about a dialectical-based learning versus an analytical-based learning. Let's see. Dialectical education implies that a learner cannot see all sides of a question until he has chosen one. But analytical education assumes that choosing one side blinds the learner to all others. In analysis, therefore, the learner cannot be held responsible for his knowledge because the means for making him responsible lie in an untouched set of moral or intellectual options. Adopting one option means ignoring all the others. Conscience plays no role. Thought and action exist apart from each other, the mind affecting to observe but not to participate in the acting out of ideas. Fearful lest its participation should prejudice learning, yet ignorant that participation is essential in bringing together thought and action for responsible learning. For this reason, the value-free approach of analysis warps education by methodically straining out the normative nutrition in life and letters, and by sacrificing the transcendent, life-transforming value of knowledge to a dead set of utilitarian options and objectives. Whereas the value-free stance is useful in analysis at the low material level of being, it is a disastrous position to try to live from. So basically what he's saying there is, if you want to know courage fully and deeply, at some point you need to
give it the old college try.
Yeah, give it the old college try and try to be courageous.
Really make a swing at it.
And that line at the beginning where he says, like, dialectical education implies that a learner cannot see cannot see all sides of a question until he has chosen one. So it's almost like you can't really know about, let's say you're taking opposite views on a situation. you can't really understand pacifism. If you wanted to be like a pacifist and you really wanted to hold on to that as an intellectual idea, you couldn't study the morality of war as just analytically and say like, well, I don't have an opinion. I don't have an opinion on whether or not I should be a pacifist or whether or not I should be someone who is okay with some sort of just war theory. I'm going to be an unopinionated observer, just asking questions and analyzing it until I can come to a conclusion. But Hicks's claim is you're never really going to know a side, or not even just a side. You're never really going to know both sides until you've tried to live as one side, until you've sort of said, I'm going to hold on to a pacifist view of ethics. And until you do that, you're never really going to fully understand both the pacifist side of things and the just war person side of things, until you've sort of like had to defend it through living it.
Or at least that your knowledge will be devoid of any nutrition.
Yes.
That's what I gathered from his thing is that you can know those two sides, but until you pick a side, you are starving out the real end of learning.
You're sacrificing the transcendent and life-transforming value of knowledge to a dead set of utilitarian opinions and objectives.
In other words, why learn about those two things if you aren't eventually going to pick a side?
Yeah.
That was my question was, are you supposed to go into the conversation with a view, or is it that you're supposed to come out of it? Was that like, because I could just...
His point is more that you need to sort of accept a view
by the end.
Almost at the beginning. You almost need to like accept a view at the beginning to know both views by the end.
I don't know if
I don't know if I agree with that conclusion. I think he's just saying, if all we do is the analytical, then what you end up with is, yeah, sure, knowledge. I know about just war theory and I know about pacifism, but unless I ever pick a side, it doesn't do anything for me, and I'll never know it as thoroughly as I could.
That's fair.
So like it's just a dead set of utilitarian values.
That second part is it, and I will never know it as thoroughly as I could.
And so I don't think I have to like, before I understand what those are, pick a side. Just war theory. I think knowing them is fine, but without taking that next step, it becomes dead knowledge.
Yeah,
I have it. It doesn't affect me in any way. Just like with courageous, I could know what courage is. I could know it's one of the virtues. I could know what happened, but unless I at some point apply it to my life, it's just dead knowledge.
Yeah. So the educated person, according to Hicks, and going back, is the person that has kind of like this mechanism of the inner dialectic kind of chugging along at all times. And what I mean by this is, David Hicks says the job of a teacher is to fill a student's head with voices, which sounds kind of creepy. But what he means by this is that since the dialectical way of knowing something is having that sort of back and forth relationship, and the best example of the dialectical playing itself out are like Platonic dialogues. Socrates, I'll even give you an example from Euthyphro, one of the dialogues. Socrates wants to know the essence of a thing. And so his whole life is he is looking for people who claim to know something. And so claims to have knowledge. And so in Euthyphro, he bumps up with this guy named Euthyphro. And Euthyphro is essentially like a smarmy religious snake oil salesman. And he's somebody that claims to know what piety is. And Socrates is like, awesome, this is great.
Isn't he the guy that turned in his dad?
Yeah. He's like, Euthyphro, this is awesome. I'm being put on trial for piety. And we have an episode on Euthyphro earlier. Yep. But in it, Socrates says, hey, Euthyphro, you know what piety is, right? And Euthyphro's like, yep. Socrates says, what is it?
Got that nailed to the wall.
Yeah, and Socrates says, what is it? And Euthyphro says, it's what I'm doing right now. And Socrates says, that's unhelpful. Can you give me a more precise definition? And Euthyphro says, it's what the gods love. What the gods love is pious. And then Socrates asks the great question, do the gods love it because it's pious, or do we call it pious merely because the gods love it? In other words, do the gods sort of have this frivolous, whatever the gods in their frivolous nature love, we call piety, or are the gods recognizing a element in a thing that
Some deeper thing.
some deeper thing that is pious. And Euthyphro gets
Doesn't he point out also that the gods don't always agree on
Yes,
what the good
yes.
idea is? Yeah.
And he says, and then Euthyphro says, no, it's what the gods agree on. And so Socrates says, well, if the gods agree that there are 5 books on the table, is that pious? And Euthyphro's like, I don't like you, Socrates.
Leave me alone, man. I'm going
leave
to
me
court
alone.
right now.
And so
Take a shower.
Basically, they get to the point that piety isn't the reason the gods like it is because there is something that we call piety. And Socrates is like, all right, that's what I want to know. Don't just give me examples. Show me the thing itself. And Euthyphro gets frustrated with Socrates and leaves him.
Right.
But what Socrates is trying to do with that questioning with Euthyphro is he's trying to chip away. So the dialectical way of knowing something is the chipping away of everything that it's not in hopes that you can get to what the thing is. Now, the jury is, I think, still out on whether or not the dialectical approach, through its sort of negative action, it's always removing what it's not, right? Dialectic is kind of like a chipping away. You can't see me on the...
YouTube can.
YouTube
when I
looks
post
like
this
a
2 years
waving
later.
badge.
I'm like a badge. I'm like a little mole moving dirt away. So it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, in hopes that you can get to what it is. And it's unclear whether or not pure dialectic can ever get to piety. Like it can never get to the thing that it is. It can just tell me what it's all the things that it's not. And this is sort of Socrates' eternal frustration, is that you can never get to what the thing is.
Weirdly enough, Socrates actually often just posits, here's what I think it is.
Yes, and this is perfect. And so I think when people read Socrates, if they say, oh, well, that life basically is you can never get to a sure statement about anything because you're analyzing it and you're just always going to get in circles and you're never going to get to the core itself and we can never get to the realm of the forms to be able to see the thing for its pure essence and you're never going to know. And you're just always going to be guessing or you're always going to be in the cave or whatever. But Socrates the character doesn't live that way.
Right.
Socrates actually believes things. One thing that Socrates believes is, and we're getting to this, how dogma works in the soul. Sorry, how dialectic works in the soul, is that Socrates actually, he takes statements as axioms, or takes statements as like baseline things, like a life of justice is better than a life of injustice.
He eventually proves that. He proves it with the Republic.
But he proves it by saying that unjust things hurt you and just things help you. And so maybe the thing that he takes as an axiom is people don't want to hurt themselves on purpose.
Yeah.
There's something that he gives. But Socrates...
Something is self-evident.
Yes. Socrates eventually says that there are self-evident things. And the educated person, or the person who is using reason in the classical sense, is not just using reason analytically to gather data and get bell curves, and gets data science degrees, Thomas.
Thank you.
I'm just kidding.
Thanks.
But the person who is also has a well-developed rational soul is using dialectic, using that question, is testing the given statements about the world. And so in the Greek world, they had this word called dogma. And all dogma is let's see, if we have a definition of dogma. Dogmas, from the Greek meaning that which seems good. So the student, or the person who has a functioning rational soul, what they have to do is they accept the dogmas of life and live according to them, but are always testing them with dialectic. So, for example, you accept the dogmas of life are the common sense things about life that come out of the stories, like
Treat your mom nice.
yes, honor your parents, don't tell lies, the stuff that you sort of populate children's books with.
Right.
It is better, it's better to do things the right way than the fast way, or any of those little Aesop's fables, or any of those things that seem good that can't be necessarily like proven logically, but are sort of the accepted things in life, like cheaters never prosper, or it is better to live a life of virtue than to live a life of vice. This is what they're wrestling with at the beginning of the Republic. Is it better to be just or unjust? And all Socrates' students are like, we want to believe that it's better to be just, because they say that seems right, or that's the given statement. That is the thing that gets put out there. And then Socrates is testing it by saying, okay, well, let's test this. And then he's talking about the nature of it, the nature of justice. And by testing it, he's using that dialectic. He's asking questions. He's trying to understand through the chipping away of what isn't. And this is supposed to be the inner life of the rational person. Is you have analysis, but you're supposed to also have this inner dialectic that's always going. It's not that you're cynical and skeptical and you're always questioning. And I think that's what a lot of people, at least for a long time, that's what I thought sort of the intellectual life would lead you to, is just like cynicism and skepticism, where you're always questioning everything and you're sort of being that like first year undergraduate philosophy punk. Right. That's just super annoying. That's just like, well, what if we're just brains in jars? You can't prove we're not. So I can like give into
my girlfriend,
so I can give into my passions, like, yeah.
You're just a brain in a jar too. Why are you so mad?
So, but in the classical world, the sort of healthy rational soul accepts the dogmas and lives according to them, while always testing them in their life through dialectic. Okay. And that's what he's getting at. That's what Hicks is getting at by saying dialectical education implies that a learner cannot see all sides of a question until he has chosen one. And let me see if I can find a good pull quote where he's talking about our relationship with dogma. Well, maybe this paragraph will help. All of life is a student's laboratory for dialectical learning. Dogmas, from the Greek meaning that which seems good, are his hypotheses. He seldom chooses them. They are thrust upon him by his teachers, by the old writers, or by the very nature of life itself. The obvious example, as Kant pointed out, is the dogma of free will underlying all human behavior. No one has ever scientifically verified free will, nor has the dogma ever relaxed its grip on the average man seeking to carve out a moral and purposeful life, despite the attacks levied against it by deterministic philosophers in the name of experimental science. Dogmas like free will are not value preferences or moral options, but firm convictions received on authority, since dialectic begins with sincere acceptance, not skeptical detachment. Once he receives a dogma, the student of the dialectic begins in his life and learning to verify it. At the same time, challenges and contradictions to the dogma occur, altering the original dogma, reforming it. Conscience compels the student to act on these reformulations, to take responsibility for what he knows, and to be constantly renewing his dialectical quarrel with life and letters. Rather than prepare the student for the carefree outer life he wants, dialectical learning awakens him to the quarrelsome inner life he must have if he is to preserve and enlarge his frail humanity. I mean, that's good. It's such a good paragraph. It's such an amazing book. The trouble is that the whole book is like paragraphs like that. So it's like trying to drink a pint of espresso. Like you just can't do it. So when we're talking about the rational faculties and man should be guided by reason, we're not just meaning that, as my students often take it, that man should be like AI robots that are just using statistical analysis to make conclusions about what should happen. Right. If you do that, well, then you can get into, you can become Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment. You can get to conclusions like, I can murder this old woman and take her money and help the less fortunate, and I am maximizing happiness in the world. Even though I have to do one subtraction,
right?
Person, 3.
Yeah, 3. Yeah.
Whoops.
Right.
Bad math.
Whereas, the dialectical, at some point, what Hicks is sort of saying is that this quarrelsome inner life that the rational faculty engenders in the person is, you sort of accept the dogmas of the world, the the moral lessons from stories, the things taught to you by teachers, the sort of the givenness of your life, that you are a person that seems to have that you have free will, that you have that you hear stories that the person who gives himself over to their appetites is someone who is going to be miserable. And you don't want to believe it because you want to be a wonderful exception, but you're probably not. Hicks is saying that the rational person, the person who has a healthy rational faculty, is somebody that is going to accept those dogmas of life and use them as hypotheses, and then live a life of testing those hypotheses by living them.
Right.
And by doing that, you'll have sort of this. Well, you'll have what did he call it? That enlarge his frail humanity, as opposed to sacrificing the transcendent life transforming knowledge to a dead set of utilitarian options and objectives. Anyway, the point of sort of of this podcast was I wanted to redeem that word dogma for people, because when we hear dogma, we think sort of like just sort of
Dead, right?
Yeah.
It's like bad ideology. Like
it is bad. It is always bad ideology.
It's only followed because it's tradition or something like that.
That it's dogmas are maybe the things, the hurdles of life that need to be overcome for your self-actualization or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, and I think people would be happier and healthier, at least according to the classical world, if they accepted dogmas, not unthinkingly, but said, I want to test if the virtuous life is better than the not virtuous life. Because this is what all the stories say, that we should be, that the virtuous man is the good man, that the good life is one of virtue. I want to test to see if that's true, not through analysis, but through dialectic, by saying, I'm going to live as virtuously as possible and fight for it in my life and test it in that way and know it that way.
Right.
And have this sort of like, quarrelsome inner life in regards to virtue. And Hicks is saying that type of intellectual life is the path to a higher type of human existence than not doing that. Then either just like, being the dead fish that goes along with the stream, or letting yourself be sort of like enveloped by the darkness of the animal side of your desires.
Sure. But I guess you said this, but dogma is still received, maybe critically is the wrong answer, wrong phrasing, but it is still considered before it's
considered.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't just there's probably the person who sort of. The person who receives dogma completely forms their life to live around it, but spends a life not considering it, is probably limiting themselves in some way, and is probably
and you might have accepted wrong dogmas.
or you may have accepted wrong dogmas.
Like I'm thinking of current zeitgeist dogmas in America, right? That we probably, the three of us, would not ascribe to. We don't want someone accepting those unthinkingly.
Sure. Yeah.
You must mean something different by dogma, though. Or maybe you don't.
At least in the maybe I don't know. I guess maybe I should have spent some more time teasing out what Hicks is getting at when he means dogmas.
Well, Merriam-Webster, let's just give a definition. Something considered as an established opinion, or, 2, a belief or body of beliefs concerning faith or morals laid down by a church.
Yes.
So you could probably...
I'm more thinking of maybe the first definition is what Hicks is getting
an established opinion, but the problem is we got a lot of established opinions that probably
Yeah.
aren't good these days.
Well, then that's where he's saying that they need to be tested.
Yeah.
And this is also why a education that considers that which is old things, is probably more helpful for testing dogmas than recent things, because there is a test of time that, like, the dogmas that have survived along like 1,000 years are probably more worthy of testing than dogmas that seem to be something that received opinions that seem to be in vogue nowadays.
Yeah.
So the things that populate all of, like what we were saying, all right, Aristotle says the happy person is the person who lives according to virtue. There's your dogma. To know it, you need to try to live. To know it, you need to sort of accept it as a thing to live by. Okay, the people who have come before have said that which seems good is the virtuous life is the path to happiness. Take that as your hypothesis. Here's my hypothesis. I'm going to test it out by applying it in my life. That's more what Hicks is getting at, and I think that's why the value of an education that is going back and looking at the human conversation going back thousands of years, as opposed to saying like what is in vogue today. Ignore everything else. Live by the things that are in vogue today, because chances are the things that are in vogue today have probably been in vogue at some point in history and have not survived for whatever reasons, because maybe they actually don't contribute to human happiness or whatnot. Were you thinking of something in particular, AJ?
I mean, tolerance.
Like living,
yeah, like tolerance as the ultimate virtue, right? That's probably not a great dogma.
Let everybody do whatever they want as long as they don't hurt you.
As long as you can express yourself and not hurt anyone else.
Yeah. So if you sort of take that, it's like, okay, well, let's take that as a received. This is that which seems good, and
run it through the old dialectic,
and run it through the old dialectic, and accept it as live according to it, but don't just unthinkingly live according to it. Actually test it out in life and see if it enlarges it or not. That's probably a much healthier approach to the intellectual life than just blindly accepting something, whether it's blindly accepting something from the old world or conventional morality or whatever, or blindly accepting something that's in vogue today. Anyway, that's those are my thoughts. Or that's sort of what when you hear the Platonic soul, when you hear reason or talking about the rational faculties, or in AJ's podcast when Aristotle says reason is that which differentiates us from the animals, it doesn't just mean the ability to do math or to count or to do analysis. It's this thing as well. It's to have that, to have a knowledge that comes through experiencing something by taking it as a true thing and then spending time testing it while living with it. It's a way. It's the way of knowing that is. It's like the taste and see, as opposed to like weigh and measure.
Right. Well, it's looking, or to use C.S. Lewis, it's looking at versus looking along.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I can look at the light beam, or I can look at the lens and see or I can look through it and see what the world looks like through that view.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's what I got. I don't know if we're short or long, but that's all I got.
Okay. I mean, this has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. You can reach out to us at CLSSCAL Stuff on Twitter, or you can send us an email at theguysatclassicalstuff.net. You can always patronize us at patreon.com/classicalstuff. And there you can find our in-between episodes, a monthly AMA, some other cool things. And yeah, that's what's happening.
Cool.
Any other last thoughts, boys? Any classical stuff we got wrong?
We never
I'm
make
sure.
mistakes. No.
I'm sure we did.
Great to hear we're doing fine. All right. This is the boys of Classical Stuff signing off.